Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of the Cine-Files Shorts. I am one of the half of one of the crews you see here, and a third of the other crew you see here. This is our first crossover weird episode. We're trying to make it work here. Both the Cine-Files and the Geek Buddies are coming together to have a conversation for the Cine-Files Shorts. I am John Roca. I'm joined by my Cine-Files co-host over there, Steve Morris. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm honored to be part of the Geek Buddies. It's one of my favorite podcasts.
Oh, no, you've got it all wrong, Steve. They're coming on board the Cine-Files, so they should be honored to be with us. That's Michael Vogel and Shannon McClung, both who have been guests on the Cine-Files numerous times. How are you, gentlemen?
Good. I guess I have to say I'm honored because John told me that's how I'm supposed to feel right now.
You're damn right. You're damn right. You know, I don't brook no fools. But no, today we're excited to talk about something. This is the impetus of Steve Morris, because the three of us on the Geek Buddies, we were having a conversation about cancel culture on last week's episode, talking about JK Rowling and everything that was happening, and this idea of cancel culture and what it means, does it exist, what have you. Well, Steve Morris is an ardent listener or avid listener of the show, and he chimed in and texted the three of us and said, I really wish I could have been on that show. I would have had some things to say about cancel culture. So that I think one of us, or maybe me, proposed the idea of turning it into a Cine-Files short where Steve could have his response to our conversation about cancel culture, and the four of us could discuss it here on the show. And it is related to film and everything that's going on in the world of film, because cancel culture also applies to films and old films. You saw that with Gone with the Wind. Certainly we're seeing that with JK Rowling in the Harry Potter series. So all of this still makes sense under the brand of the Cine-Files and the brand of the Geek Buddies. So ladies and gentlemen, sit back and relax and then enjoy this conversation on cancel culture. I think we have to go with Steve Morris to lead this thing. Steve, what was your initial thought on our conversation on cancel culture, and why were you inspired to text us to say what you wanted to say? What is it basically that you want to say about our conversation on cancel culture?
Well, this is a topic that I've been really thinking about and struggling with really for years, although this term cancel culture has only kind of started coming in recently.
Yes.
The idea of, finding someone, whether it was, James Gunn in tweets or whatever, where someone crosses a certain line and then the society as a whole says, okay, you're done. Yeah. What's been so hard for me, I think, is that these are very much my politics, whether we're talking about Black Lives Matter or Me Too or gay and transgender rights or all of those things. That's what I strongly believe in. And yet I keep going back to this as sort of a tactic for social change. And that's the big thing I've been thinking about lately is this an effective tactic for social change? And more, I believe that while I agree with the politics, I disagree with the tactic. And the reason for that is that I feel it lacks nuance. It lacks proportionality. It is a bad strategy in terms of building coalition. And it is, in my opinion, fundamentally anti-liberal, and so I really struggle. And I'll just say very quickly what I mean by these things. When I say it lacks nuance, what I mean is that I'm a believer in innocent until proven guilty, that one has to look at the entire case and understand the entire circumstances. And that's not how Twitter and social media and the current speed of internet stuff works. It's one headline, it's one quote, it's one text, and or one photograph even, and then we sum up the entire value of a person based on that. And so it doesn't allow us to go into, well, what are the extenuating circumstances? What else can we say about this person? It lacks proportionality because canceling someone is binary. You are canceled or you are not. And so there are some people who have really extreme, horrible crimes and should be canceled, but not everyone is on the same scale, and yet canceling is the same punishment for vastly different crimes. I think it's not a good tactic because generally calling people a racist or a homophobe or whatever doesn't make them go, oh, I think I've been a racist, I'll stop. It instead just makes them angry. These people unreasonably attacked me, and we need a coalition of people that believe not 100% all the same things, but believe many of the same things to fight against the people that believe a whole bunch of horrible things that we all agree upon we want to get rid of. And finally, when I say it's anti-liberal, what I mean is that a basic precept of liberal philosophy is that we can tolerate a multiplicity of ideas. And even with, the ideas of inclusion and diversity, part of those ideas is that all of us are stronger when we include people that don't actually agree all the time, that are not in lockstep, and that have different worldviews, different perspectives that they can bring to a table. And that means tolerating some people whose beliefs we really don't like. But that is core to what being a liberal is to me. Okay. So that's why I kind of go, I agree with the politics, but I don't know that this is doing us any good.
Mikey?
Disagree.
And you have the right to do that because I'm a liberal.
I do. Well, but I also have the right to do it because I think the underlying part of your argument, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I think, you and I have been friends for a very long time, and our politics are as similar as two people's politics could probably be.
Pretty damn close.
Yeah. The thing about this idea of cancel culture that has taken on a life of its own is everything you said presupposes that there's some rule book that everyone's following, or that there is some kind of agreement that happens on social media that we've all agreed that this person should be canceled. But that's actually not the case. Like the right has tried to turn cancel culture into this idea that like the left is all ganging up on somebody, but nobody can gang up with anybody. Twitter is like such a free-flowing form of ideas that everyone's calling everyone names all the time. Now, and the reason that I say this is...
Wait, hold on. You can't say that Twitter doesn't gang up on people.
Twitter gangs up. No. What I mean is Twitter gangs up. Let me put it a different way. Twitter gangs up on everybody, both big and small, for every single thing. If I say I don't like the Zack Snyder movies, I get 35,000 tweets over 4 days telling me that I can go to hell and I have no right to have an opinion. So what I mean is it's so much white noise that... You shut up. Shut up, Broca. What I mean is it's so much white noise that here's what my point is. When you look at the width and breadth of the people that we would say are canceled, nothing like there's the really bad ones, the Harvey Weinstein, everyone kind of agreed. Yeah. Okay. Canceled. Matt Lauer. We all kind of said, yeah, fuck that shit. You had a button in your room, get out of here. Yeah. But aside from a handful of people that I think everybody resoundingly agrees are canceled, take Michael Jackson, for example. I think the majority of people feel he should be canceled, or I can't personally listen to his music anymore, or after watching this documentary, which may or may not be true, it upset me so much that I don't like Michael Jackson. But there's plenty of people that still enjoy Michael Jackson, or even JK Rowling, who is so afraid of being canceled that she had to sign this letter that went out into the ether, which, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said following that letter coming out, if you're a rich person that can get your letter published in Harper's, you're probably not in danger of being canceled. No. But even JK Rowling, who everyone is like, let's cancel her. Like, the Harry Potter books are still selling fine and people are still going to Universal Studios. Right. So my point is, there's this fear that the Twitter cancel culture is getting out of hand and we are going to censor everybody and it's not free-flowing liberal ideas and people can't express themselves anymore. But that's not actually what's happening. This idea of cancel culture as being a actual movement that isn't working as a movement because it's not, it's too rigid or it's too this, is an idea that is not actually the way that it works in reality.
Shannon?
Yeah. A question for Steve. Talking about being inclusive and being tolerant of other people's ideas, with some of the ideas that are out there and that are very prevalent now because of social media, I wonder, where's that line that you draw? At some point, I don't know, someone takes a particular stance on something that is so extreme that it's no, I don't want you at the table. We don't want you at the table. You're going to do more harm than good. So
I 100% think there's a line. John and I talked about it before in one of the other podcasts, but there's Chris Hedges, who's the very depressing, journalist who writes about all the things that are horrible in the world. And he did a book, I think it's called American Fascists, which is basically exploring the extreme right wing and the extreme religious right. And the thing that he said is that, which is exactly to your point, Shannon, is that there is a certain point that even though our basic philosophy is one of tolerance, there's a certain point that we must not tolerate intolerance. that we must say no, because neo-Nazis and the KKK and white supremacist organizations, they use our tolerance in order to get a foothold into society and continue to do the things that are so destructive. So I definitely think there's a line. Personally, I don't draw that line at JK Rowling, you know, and one of the things is if you guys I know all have people in your lives or friends from high school or people that are on Facebook who say things that you find pretty damn reprehensible. And the question is, do you think that those people should have their career ruined or their name dragged through the mud? Or do you think there's someone that we hope that they can come back for? You know,
okay, go ahead.
And the thing too, I think, is that I'm pretty sure that 2 or 3 years ago, all of us were retweeting JK Rowling and really loving many of the things that she was saying. And my guess is if you look at the Venn diagram of our beliefs, well, I totally, by the way, disagree with not only do I disagree with what she said, but I think it was unbelievably insensitive. And I really wish she would shut the fuck up. Like, it's just like, stop talking. You're just making everything worse. But I think if you look at the Venn diagram of what our beliefs are, I think JK Rowling would line up with a lot of them, maybe 80%, maybe 70%. She is not the KKK. You know what I mean? She is not a Donald Trump supporter. We need JK Rowling to be part of our team. What I think is that don't cancel her, criticize her. That's what debate is. That's what is that say, this is horrible. We disagree with what you're saying.
But so using this specific example, because it's the most prevalent example that everyone keeps using, when you were speaking about cancel culture before, the way that you described it was, you know, you one tweet, a couple tweets, one photo, and you're canceled.
That certainly happened.
In the specific case of JK Rowling, there was. I mean, if we're going to go
and Doug.
Well, yeah, but I mean, and repeatedly, like if we're going to take just LGBTQ issues and put aside all of the problematic things that are in Harry Potter books, despite the fact that, to your point, there's a lot of wonderful things in the Harry Potter books. You know, she did say Dumbledore was gay, big yay. She refused to put it in the book. She only said it after the fact.
Totally cowardly. I agree.
Then when the Fantastic Beasts movies came out, they again refused to double down on the gay, even though they are literally dealing with the exact gay relationship that she implied in the book. So not great, not reason to be canceled. Then she started tweeting some anti-trans stuff. And people were like, hey, JK, cool it. And then she did it some more. And people, to exactly your point, said, hey, I don't know that you know this, and you're super liberal, and you've meant so much to me, and you meant so much to me growing up, but I'm trans / my friend is trans / my kid is trans, and what you're saying is actually really hurtful, and you probably didn't realize that, and you probably didn't mean it, and here's a whole list of articles on why. Then she started blocking people who did that, and kept doubling down on it. And when she super doubled down on it and the media picked up on it and all the articles came out and said, she's been doing this for a while and she's saying some seriously transphobic stuff, she doubled down by writing a giant essay that was filled with every single transphobic argument that you could come up with. Right. And then when that didn't go the way that she liked it, she ended up signing this letter with a bunch of people in Harper's saying, I'm really pissed off and I'm really upset because I really feel like cancel culture is getting out of control. Now, to your point, there's absolutely a case to, I'm going to keep trying to say, hey, JK, I think you're a good person in there, and I'm going to try and educate you. I'm going to try and educate you. But I think the difference from where you're coming from to where I'm coming from, and the difference from where I'm coming from to a lot of trans friends that I have and trans people that I've spoken to about this, is that to you, it's a JK Rowling, you're mostly good. 80% of us, 90% of us, we agree. This 110%, you're a little shaky on. It's kind of abhorrent, and I wish you would stop. But to a trans person, that 10%, particularly a trans person who grew up loving Harry Potter and holding this up as this got me through so many hard times. And to have JK Rowling as the person who got you through those hard times saying, by the way, a trans woman isn't really a woman, it's a dude, and he's going to come into the bathroom and he's going to attack me. And also, most people who get trans conversions, who live their lives trans as kids, change their minds later because people are just trying to force them into those roles, and it's not really a real thing, and you're just confusing children. I was a tomboy when I was a kid. There was probably times that I wanted to be a boy, and if somebody had let me, I probably would have done it. And boy, that would have been a mistake, because God, how awful would that be? I think that at a certain point, you do have to call the ball and be like, you're done. But again, when we say you're canceled, or when we say cancel culture, what does that really mean for JK Rowling? Like, let's examine this for a minute. What does that actually look like for her? Like, is her career done? Is she over? Is she out on the street? Did we take all her money? Like, what's happening to JK Rowling really right now?
Well, and that's
I didn't hold on.
Oh,
I didn't get on this to talk about JK Rowling.
Well,
Like, I agree with basically everything you said, and what she said is horrible. What I got on here is to talk about, and so I'm not going to take the position of defending a person who said terrible, awful things.
Right.
What
No,
I'm saying is, as a movement in general, whether it's defacing a statue of Abraham Lincoln, whether it's talking about George Washington, whether it's there are things where we need to have a more complex and critical look at people that are complex. Is that just saying yes or no to things, or even like someone that, you know, posts a thing on Twitter, or a person who is not a big famous person who has a photograph taken of them or a quote of them, and that's going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. Like,
okay, so I hear your point. Okay, if you two want to have a separate conversation, let me jump in here. I hear your point. The thing is, I don't believe cancel culture exists. I don't think it's a real thing. We have always registered as a public our dislike or like of anything. Once you cross a line and we dislike it, you can apply this idea of a cancel culture thing all the way back to cavemen days. And someone didn't like the way Ugg was telling his story about a certain person or whatever, and didn't want to have him telling any more stories by the campfire. This has always been.
He draws shitty buffaloes on the wall, and if he draws
racist
shitty buffalo,
those are racist buffaloes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so to me, I don't believe there's cancel culture. To me, that's like fake news. Well, it's a fun term people are using to paper over what's actually happening in the public. And I'm a little surprised to hear this because you're from Berkeley. You understand the marches that happened in the 60s. It's not like people marched in the 60s and we're totally like, let me respect this. Let's have a really complex conversation. They were doing some crazy shit too. They were bombing shit. They were
and the right wing was trying to cancel them.
Exactly. Well, right was trying to cancel them, just like they were trying to cancel the right wing. And it's always been come on. It's always
not the free speech movement.
They were marching against Nixon. They wanted Nixon out of office. They were trying to
essentially
cancel Nixon. They were trying to cancel the Vietnam War. So everyone's got their, if you're going to use cancel as the word, everyone's got their thing that they like and they don't like. And to me, using cancel is not, I just don't think it's true. With JK, I agree. There's a long list, but I hear your point, Steve. There are some people who say one thing like years ago, James Gunn did, but James Gunn also spent 10 years in therapy and addressed those things before he even shot one frame of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So he had done his thing. It's just a right-wing outlet had found some old things, brought him up again, and tried to call Disney out. But are there specific examples of one person being destroyed by the liberal side of things? Because I've seen, like there's a Japanese female wrestler. She got hounded out for her own body or something like that, and she ended up killing herself. Right? We've seen that happen where it's like it's angry trolls coming after body shaming people, or coming after that kind of stuff. Absolutely, that's not cancel culture. That's trolling. And
that's online abuse, as somebody brought up on our YouTube. Online abuse come up in the YouTube comments, and that's a whole other topic, and that's super toxic. But Steve, just to back, because I actually agree with John, what most of what he just said, which I don't usually say, but in this case, I actually agree with most of what John said. But I wasn't trying to get you to defend JK Rowling, and I don't think that you were trying to JK Rowling. But what John was bringing up is actually what my point is, which is, let's actually examine that for a minute. What does canceling JK Rowling really look like? Because I think when you get past this is not free speech, this is the opposite of free speech, I would question that, because nobody is taking the Harry Potter books off the shelves. Nobody is.
But again, I think JK is a terrible example. You're taking one of the most powerful people in the world with the most powerful, the most popular character ever in the English language. Yeah, I'm not worried about her. She is uncancelable.
Okay, but then
what's your inherent point, Steve? Because we'll get lost in the JK Rowling thing.
Yeah, what's another example of someone who you felt was canceled that either shouldn't have been, or a cancellation that didn't sit right with you, or where's the example that this is actually a free speech issue?
Do you remember the woman who got on a plane in Heathrow, who had 27 followers on Twitter? She was flying to South Africa. Yeah. She tweeted a thing that was in her mind, a joke about racism. She tweeted, and I quote, "Flying to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." Now, this is a horrible joke.
Yes.
It's awful. She, in her mind, was making the joke that a racist would make, knowing that she's not a racist. That's how her mind worked. By the time she landed, it was the #1 trending thing on Twitter. She'd been fired. Yep. She had 6,000 messages on her tweets and messages, direct messages. Her fiance had left her. Her life was essentially ruined because of that. Because of one really stupid, insensitive, not funny, dumb joke. And if you Google search her today, that is still the #1 thing. There's a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson that follows a bunch of people that things like this happen to. And that's what I mean, is that she was canceled by a whole bunch of people that know nothing about her for one sentence that went on Twitter.
And that's lessons. The life is lessons. These are the warriors in this game, and sometimes people who don't think before they tweet, who think they can casually tweet whatever, they are going to get smoked at the beginning of social media. And that's what's happened. Yeah. And people are still doing it. Look what we're seeing now. That guy who went crazy at the Costco on that elderly immigrant couple lost his job. Everybody's gone after him on Twitter and on Facebook. And he went into the newspaper claiming that he wanted a second chance to show things, and he's lying through his teeth. And that's the thing, Steve. At some point, we have to call this behavior out, and you have to know there's consequences, because you do have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of consequences. You make a stupid-ass joke that's racist, you're going to lose your job and get smoked. That's the thing, and people need to
I've heard all of us have said stuff that we regretted in some circumstances.
But we didn't tweet it.
But again, I mean, here's the issue that people have with social media. And again, the difference here is that, as bad as that is for that woman to have happened to her, that's not it's not like McCarthyism. It's not like there are a specific group of people that are sitting on the internet waiting to come at somebody and destroy their life. This is just the tide and swell. And what I would say to that is, as unfortunate as it is for her, there's no difference between Twitter is a social platform, and going on Twitter and saying a joke like that is the equivalent, if you wanted to take a smaller example, of if I walked into the boardroom at Hasbro and I was getting ready to fly to Africa and said, "Hey guys, leaving for Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white," and I walked out, I'm relatively sure I'd be fired. I'm relatively sure people of color in that room would have a very different opinion of me than they had before I walked out of that room. I'm relatively sure there would be consequences. Now, those consequences would be confined to that room or to Hasbro, the company. And maybe if Hasbro, the company, talked to other companies, like other toy companies, maybe I wouldn't be able to get jobs at other toy companies because I would have been that dude that made the AIDS joke in the boardroom at Hasbro. Right. But my point is, again, what happened to her, as horrible as it is for her that her entire life was ruined, and that's the #1 thing that comes up when you Google her name, when you go onto Twitter and you put something out there in the universe, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or anything, you're putting that out there in perpetuity. So don't put that joke, I do feel bad, and I understand the empathy towards somebody who, in a moment of bad judgment, did something. But just because Twitter as a platform makes the punishment exponentially larger doesn't mean that didn't happen prior to social media.
That's what I want to get and Shannon, you've been quiet the whole time. Please chime in on this. But that's the thing that I think is these people always come out with these excuses. Oh, I lost my mind. This was momentary. This was a one-time thing. We don't really know that. She could have been saying racist shit for quite some time and felt the white privilege gall to tweet something like this and got smoked for it.
That's exactly it. We don't really know. That's what I mean. There's no nuance. We don't know anything about the whole person.
Right. So you can feel empathy or not empathy for her and have it backed up on whatever you create in your head. But Shannon, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, and that's the difference between a public figure doing something kind of abhorrent and a private citizen doing something abhorrent. Because for the amount of celebrities that have been canceled, there is always going to be, I don't think anyone outside of like Harvey Weinstein, for the most part, everyone has a little section of people backing them up.
Yeah.
Including like Louis C.K., which is crazy to me. But they're always going to have some allies in their corner. And when you have someone like this young woman who made that joke, I guarantee there are comedians out there. Maybe they're not saying it. I guarantee there are comedians out there saying it was a joke. It was a bad joke. Get over it. So I think it depends on what we're talking about. Like to cancel a celebrity, I don't think that's not going to happen. Harvey Weinstein wasn't canceled. He was fucking arrested.
No, because he's a fucking criminal.
And exactly. I mean, it doesn't matter if the internet canceled him. I mean, he is going to prison. Now, when you have someone that kind of makes a bad joke, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of with Steve that you have to take a breath and be like, all right, what else is there? Because again, I'll bring up the Christopher Nolan example. Like his name got dropped in an interview very casually.
The chairs.
And within, minutes, people are saying it's ableist bullshit. And then it turns out, oh, that's not actually the truth.
But that again proves the point. Like Christopher Nolan was called out. Everybody said he's ableist. It went on for about 24 hours and it was resolved. And lo and behold, he hasn't been canceled. Similarly, James Gunn, as we talked about last week on the show, and he just came up, some really old tweets that were maybe not Africa joke bad, but not great.
They were
pretty bad shit. And he got canceled. He was pulled off Guardians 3. But then he was put on Suicide Squad, and then Disney made the decision to bring him back on. And if you read what he's written about it, like he actually used that as a big learning experience. Now, again, I don't know James Gunn. I don't think any of us know James Gunn. Maybe that's all really good PR spin. Maybe it's genuine. I don't know. But again, this kind of proves the point that this fear that we're going to cancel people and that the left is censoring as bad as anything the right did. Again, I'm separating online abuse because in general, Twitter is a toxic place and people dogpiling on like artists and fans. I mean, fandoms are toxic. Like just the piling on is a whole other issue. But when we talk about cancel culture, particularly in the way that the right is talking about it or the way that the people who wrote in the Harper's article were writing about cancel culture, I kind of have to agree with John in that I think it doesn't really exist. And Steve, even to your point about monuments, and that's, the other big discussion that's coming out that Trump is just fueling the fires of on Twitter because he's trying to distract. He's trying to distract from the other things. Yeah. But
he's got nothing
even the concept of taking down these monuments, even when it comes to some of our founding fathers, I think is more about the fact that we need to recognize the reality of these people as opposed to holding them up on these pedestals as being perfect paragons of Americana. And so I think that, Steve, I think you are right that there does need to be a more nuanced conversation about a lot of these things. But I think the reality is a lot of times that is what happens. Like we can't look at Twitter and how everybody is going to say #cancel and say that's the end all be all of the story, because most of the time it's not. The ones that are really, really bad do tend to be canceled or, as Shannon says, arrested, and everyone else, it sort of comes out in the wash.
So a couple of things. So the first is, I think James Gunn is the exception. I think
Kevin Hart, same thing. Kevin Hart did those tweets, got out of the Oscars. People still going to his movies. He's still a celebrity, still an A-list celebrity. He got away with it too.
Yeah, but I do think there is tremendous pressure. Like, honestly, I was scared about coming in and having this conversation. There have been times on Twitter frequently where I've seen people that are friends of mine tweet things or on Facebook where they're misquoting an article, and then I go and read the article. I'm like, that's not really what the article was about, or attacking the New York Times or attacking a person. I'm like, yeah, you didn't read the article. You didn't know what the details were. And now this thing that you're posting and retweeting has been retweeted 50,000, 100,000 times. So yet I have frequently not actually called my friend out because I felt like they were going to attack me. And I didn't want to take a position because my politics are the same. I don't want to be that's why I don't want to be in the position of defending JK Rowling. No way. That's not what I think. In terms of the statues, first of all, every fucking Confederate statue, like there's still a Robert E. Lee barracks at West Point. Like that is insane. Like they should go away. And the people that say, oh, you're taking away our history. History is not in statues. History is in books. You want to get history, read a book, take a class, go see a documentary. Like what statues are symbols. That's what they are. And taking away all those Confederate symbols, fantastic. Yeah. When it comes to, and I completely agree with you, Mike, about the founding fathers. What we need is to look at them. I mean, John and I just spent a whole bunch of time talking about the musical 1776 and Thomas Jefferson, and having a very complicated conversation about a very complicated, and for me, the most troubling and difficult of our founding fathers. I don't believe in canceling him, because to sort of say, take down all the monuments, never talk about Thomas Jefferson, like that's crazy too. You know, it's like, no, we need to talk about him, but we need to talk about him in a new way that brings in all of the reality of who that person was.
Well, and again, I would just ask, I don't know that I've actually heard anybody say we should never mention Thomas Jefferson again.
Oh, I have.
And so again,
there's a petition going around right now to remove him from textbooks.
Well, and again, there's a lot of petitions out there that I would say to anybody, like, I don't agree with that. Like, you can't, just as many very patriotic people don't want to look at the bad things our founding fathers did. You can't, you have to do both. We wouldn't have America without them. Also, they did super shitty things and they were kind of horrible. Like, we have to be, you have to talk both things. And I think that for most people, when it comes to these monuments and when it comes to like dealing with that, it's the fact that the right particularly, and many people who are even moderates, like, just don't really want to have a conversation about how not great our founding fathers were.
Yeah.
Well, and the right is taking down the foundations of our democratic society. So fuck statues. These people are actually taking things down that affect human beings and their lives. They're canceling our Constitution. They're canceling we're seeing them systematically destroy these things that we have depended on as pillars of our society, step by step. Putting all those judges in there who are going to vote a certain way, stacking courts. That's what I'm saying. So while we're off worried about whether we're being good liberals, they're just snickering at us and destroying shit left and right. So that's the thing, that to get lost in this whole nuance of this or that, to me, I think misses the point of what's actually happening. And they, in my opinion, they want you to be distracted by the jangly thing, not by what they're actually doing.
But I do think, and I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. And I think, Steve, to your point, I understand what you're saying. I'm kind of taking the opposing viewpoint, but I actually do appreciate the fact that you, and I know this from knowing you for so many years, you love nothing more than a nuanced conversation. If we can have a nuanced conversation and discuss the gray of an issue for about 40 minutes to 18 hours, you're good to go. Like, you're set. Like, pour a drink and let's dive in. So I appreciate that. Unfortunately for the world at large, Twitter is not the place where nuanced conversations happen. And this whole idea of canceling and we're over this person and the retweeting and I'm done, and to Shannon's point, the Christopher Nolan's ableist, like, that's what Twitter is. And so I think what I'm saying is not that I think you're wrong, that Twitter lacks nuance. But what I am saying is that while the right is trying to take cancel culture and get all of us who, to your point, more or less agree politically, to wrap us up into having these conversations and debating cancel culture and is it okay and is it not? And I want to do this. It's like, the reality is, the reality is that Twitter is Twitter. Twitter gonna Twitter. Twitter is just gonna Twitter. It's Twitter gonna Twitter. And the reality is, again, kind of the point, James Gunn, Kevin Hart, there's been so many people that, Aziz Ansari, it was an attempted cancellation, I guess I would call it. And then he came out and was super honest about the whole thing, and he does a whole I wouldn't even call it stand up. He gets up on stage and it's like he just kind of talks about it now, which is really interesting. And so again, I think whether it be Christopher Nolan, James Gunn, Kevin Hart, all these things, there's so many examples of attempted cancellation or a justified cancellation that then we got the comeback story or whatever. I think that it's hard and again, I still don't know, aside from, I guess, lady with the bad Africa joke, aside from the people that we all kind of agree, like, they should probably go away.
Can I give you another example?
Sure. Absolutely.
So I don't know her name.
Do you have time still, Jen? Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's a professor. It's actually a husband and wife professor. The woman is, it was some, Eastern kind of Ivy League college. And she was a beloved liberal arts professor. I don't remember what department, one of the most popular professors at the university. And the university, this is 5 or 6 years ago, put out a message. It was coming up on Halloween. And they put out a message to the students that said, here is a list of the costumes that will not be allowed at this Halloween because they would be offensive.
Right.
And it's exactly the list that we would all probably agree nobody should fucking dress up as those things on Halloween. And this professor wrote kind of a letter to the school paper or whatever that said, hey, I don't think anybody should dress up as these things either, but do you feel that you as students should be concerned that the university is dictating to you what you can wear and what you can't wear? This is the tradition of our university in terms of free speech, and I think you should consider that. Again, I don't think anyone should wear these things, but is this the role of the university? There was a huge uprising against her.
Yep.
They had a big, huge rally to have her fired. She then what happened, and the husband came out, who was also a beloved professor, and he went to this thing where everyone's yelling at this woman, and he says, hey, let's you guys come on stage here and let's have a conversation and discuss the values of freedom of speech versus, dealing with racism. What's the best way to do it? They shouted him down. They threw stuff at them. Mm-hmm. And then what happened was there's these things for, there's Yelp for college professors. And if you looked at what her reviews were for the previous 10 years, it was all, she changed my life. She's the greatest professor in the world. She spent so much time with me, individual care. This is the best professor at the university. And they started a movement and they flooded her reviews with 1 star. She should be fired. She's a racist. And she lost her job.
Right.
So at what point was somebody not, I think that's horrible. I think that's a shame. I think it's bad. But again, I would say, who wasn't allowing freedom of speech? I mean, if the mob is going to yell, the mob is going to but I mean, everybody was talking
put herself in the situation. She could have been okay with it. She could have just sat back, but she chose to talk and speak on it. By choosing to speak on it, you are risking the wrath.
You're risking. Yeah, you've just made my point. You're risking cancel culture, and this is putting a fear on freedom of speech on people. And she's a liberal professor who is beloved,
right?
Talking about what is the responsibility of the university, and she lost her job because of it.
I'd like to finish my point. What I'm saying is that she was allowed to say whatever she wanted to say, as Mike was starting to say. She has freedom of speech. If you put yourself into a highly charged situation, don't complain when the mob turns on you, because you are incurring the wrath of the mob. You can, and it's not about fear. It's not about
problem
fear.
Is the mob.
It's about you just said, Steve, it's about the nuanced situation, right? You can't live in a utopian world that's black and white. You can't lie to yourself that it's a utopian world that's black and white. I should be allowed to say what I want to say and nobody should get mad at me. That's ridiculous. In the real world, everything is gray and muddled. So if her on a college campus, when kids have hormones raging and they're dumb as hell half the time, if she thought her saying something like this wasn't going to possibly spark a backlash as an intelligent professor, which I'm sure she was, she didn't think the whole thing through. And it's not that she can say to her husband, this is dumb. I don't think this should happen. Speak it out into the public. You risk the mob wrath. That's the way it's always been.
And I guess to your point about the woman who made the bad joke on Twitter, all I know of this story is your version of this, and I don't know what costumes were on that list. I don't know exactly what her wording was, although you're saying that the mob just screamed them down and yelled at them, was every single person foaming at the mouth? Did anybody have a point to make? I'd have to actually dive into this whole situation and really go out. But I mean, I think
to be clear, I don't have the details. It's a story that I heard a while ago. So,
but again, I think
correct.
No, and I can assume what the details are, but I'm just saying I don't want to necessarily assume and say I have an absolute opinion on this when I don't know all the details. But I think that the issue is, look, if you are, I'm assuming things like Indian headdresses, blackface, sombrero, I'm just going down the list of things that are probably don't do this. So a list comes out and say, hey, don't put on an Indian headdress. That's fucking offensive to indigenous people. Blackface, don't be stupid. Like, just don't do these things. I understand the theoretical, like, hey, this is, they are telling you what to do in the university. We are a liberal arts school and you shouldn't do it. But you know what? If you're the indigenous people that go to that school, or you're the black people that go to that school, after years and years and years of white people using your costumes or using your identity for sporting teams, for a funny night out at a frat party, for this and that, I can absolutely understand someone being like, all due respect, liberal beloved professor, shut up, now's not the time. Like, honestly, can we just say that, like, blackface, we just don't do it? I don't want to have a discussion about the right of people to do blackface and express themselves. And as a liberal arts college, we shouldn't say that. Like, I understand the frustration and anger in that, even though in the theoretical sense of freedom of speech, I understand where you're coming from. But again, like, I can only compare this when we talk about cancel culture as like this censorship thing. The only thing I can think of to compare it to is McCarthyism. And McCarthyism was the government enacting something like hunting people down and putting them on trial and saying, you can't live this way or do this, whatever. A bunch of kids at a school saying, we don't fucking like this. At the end of the day, is their right to say? Did they say it politely? No. Could they have had a conversation about it or actually had a more reasoned debate about it? Sure. But part of freedom of speech, as you said, is allowing people to do things even when you don't like it. And that does mean even when it's an angry mob throwing things because they're being stupid and young and immature in the way they're handling a situation.
Yeah, and I got to say, I agree with Mike and John. Based off of your telling of this story, if someone is even preempting their statement saying, you know what, you shouldn't do this, that being said, it might not be the university's place to dictate this. You're voluntarily putting yourself in that situation. And as to the husband, maybe, and again, we don't know the details, but going in front of a charged up student body to try to have it might not be the best place to make your case.
Did we cancel John?
I think he's been canceled.
Did we cancel John? He's gone.
Yeah. See, you guys keep saying this doesn't exist. Look, it just happened.
I think we canceled John Roca.
So he said he just texted that he had an internet problem and we should keep going. So let's soldier on for another moment. So two things about it. If the student said, Mike, what you said, which is with all due respect, now is not the time, that is having the discussion. That's not what they said. They said, you're a racist. Get her fired. Those are two entirely different things. And the second, yay!
Uncanceled.
You've been uncanceled.
Sorry.
The second thing is, and I teach at a university, and that a university, there needs to be sacred places where people can have discussions about things that are uncomfortable and to disagree. That's part of what a university should be. And I constantly, as a teaching film, have students who are want to make movies about rape, about violence, about suicide, about, sexual orientation, about religion, about politics. And my feeling in the classroom is, in order to be a good teacher, we have to discuss uncomfortable topics sometimes. It's never happened to me, but it's happened to other teachers I knew who got, like, whoa, you said the word rape, that makes me uncomfortable. And they got written up and had to go to see the professor. It's like, no, well, the student was making a film about rape. I can't talk about their film. I can't do my job unless I use this word,
But again, and this is where, I guess all I can say to that is, like, universities need to stand up for what they stand up for. Like, again, in this situation with her getting fired, like, everything you said about what the students did, again, to your point, no, they did not get up and politely say, hey, I am offended by what you said. I would like to sit and discuss the merits of free speech versus being sensitive to the So they didn't do it. But, like, again, to your point, you don't get to dictate how polite or not polite people are. So did they all get super upset and say, I want her fired? And did they all go on Yelp and give her shitty reviews? And did they all do a bunch of stuff that I probably agree with you was probably not the best way to handle it and maybe a little bit vindictive? Sure. But again, in a free society, they have every right to do every single thing they did.
That's their freedom of speech.
Now, the university also has the right, as the university, to say, hey, we hear you. She's a beloved professor. She fucked up. We're going to deal with this, but we're not going to fire her. So I think your issue is actually with the university. Same thing for, look, Disney. I mean, just to use that same example we're using, Disney, who is super worried about having their family-friendly look and everything else, like they canceled James Gunn. And then they changed their mind and said, Guardians is pretty good. We want James Gunn back. Like to your issue is not that, maybe it is, I don't know. But I mean, it seems like all these kids, you don't like how they handled the situation, but they handled the situation how they handled it. They said what they said.
Is your issue with the mob or with the employers, the companies? Because those people, that woman who flew the plane, her employer could have easily not fired her. And her fiance could have easily not left her. They could have all said, no, this is, we stand by this person. She's been great for us. She's been fantastic. She's incredible. Same thing with the university. Could have said, this professor is unfortunately being targeted by these people because she said what she said. She is an incredible professor. We stand by her. But these people are all afraid of the bottom line, which is the dollar. And so when they see a bunch of people going at them, it's the same thing with the Redskins. That name is only being changed now because enough of the public bitched about it, and $620 million of ad sponsorship
that's why.
said, you gotta change that name. It's always all about the money. I don't think free speech has ever been is an at issue here. It's more about how people react to it because they're not willing to stand to lose the money in exchange.
Well, that's why you asked. You started by asking, who am I angry with? And it's like universities, corporations. They're all. This pressure is all going to work on all of them.
Yes,
it's very rare for companies to stay. And I mean, the fact is, like the Redskins one is like just fucking ridiculous that it's taken so long. And by the way, because you posted what their statement was. Yeah. Nowhere in their statement do they say anything about the deep hurt that they've done to Native American people. It's such a lame statement. But to have the letterhead with Redskins at the top of it,
emblazoned.
It's just like horrible. But yeah, I mean, I think the reality is all of us are, for a discussion that has been not heated, but we've had disagreements. We're all mostly in agreement about all this stuff.
It got pretty heated. We canceled Rocha.
We canceled John Rocha, the outlaw.
Not the first time that's happened, but guess what? I always keep coming back. You can't cancel me forever, son.
But to answer your question, it is a mob, and mobs make me nervous, because they don't act rationally. And so, and sometimes, like in the case of, there's so many that have happened recently with the Black Lives Matter movement, with Aunt Jemima and all these things, where it's like about fucking time. And thank God the mob came and said, this is the thing, but unfortunately, they're not actually, mobs aren't controllable, and they will go after things that aren't necessarily the right things. And they're, again, to go back to the way I started, it's not nuanced, it's not proportional. And I think what it does sometimes in some of the more extreme examples is it confirms a narrative that the right is using to discredit the left. And so we don't want to play into their game and do things that they can point out, like, because when the more extreme ones happen, like defacing the statue of Abraham Lincoln, well, that's what Fox News plays over and over again. It says, see, they're crazy people, and it devalues the argument that we're trying to make throughout everything else.
I don't think it does for the person who's actually open-minded to the situation. We are not going to convert those people back. It's not going to happen. They want that stuff. They watch that stuff 24/7, and presenting a more nuanced argument is not going to win them over to your side. It isn't. And
some of them definitely.
I've never seen it happen.
We're seeing it happen right now.
Ardent Fox News supporters, I've never seen them change their minds. And that's what I'm getting.
But
we're not going to reach those people.
There are people who are saying, Mitt Romney marched and said Black Lives Matter. There are people that are not the hardcore Trump base. No, they're not. We're never going to convince them. But there are other people who are sort of, the people that, I'm going to take a chance on Trump in 2016. They are persuadable.
Right. And they have been already persuaded by the actions he's taken. Defacing a monument, it's not going to swing them back over. I hope not. But that, and the thing is, that monument is something else, right? But you're saying, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. But the thing is that how many years, how many generations have people just taken this kind of
Totally
thing?
agree. I think that's a great point.
And I think that's what this is. This is a generational explosion of things that have been happening for decades and multiple generations, and that generation has been silenced or beaten down or made to shut up. Black people, especially when it comes to complaining about the police, they just started putting it in rap lyrics in the 90s. If you watch that OJ Made in America, the documentary, you see it has been happening since the 30s and 40s, since the beginning of this country. You've seen black people being unfairly targeted by police forces all over this country for decades, for centuries. And so that's the kind of thing. So this is an explosion. Well, and you're not going to control an explosion like you couldn't with the French Revolution. You couldn't with Arab Spring. And you're not going to go do that now. It's just human beings are built to create mobs and flash up and then come back down again.
Two things. One is, because I completely agree with all that. And in terms of proportionality, which is important to me, there is no comparison to someone getting attacked on Twitter and a cop, sitting on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes. In terms of levels of tragedy and the systemic racism and the crimes committed against African Americans, literally for centuries in this country, there is no comparison. And so, yes, I understand if the pendulum swings too far in the other direction and some people maybe get hurt more than they deserve, and that's what helps us to get to the next place, then I think that's acceptable. But you mentioned the French Revolution. We don't want to go there either. We don't want Robespierre, right? Because there's a certain, that's really what my argument is like, be careful, go slow, we don't want to bring out the guillotine.
I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. Gentlemen? Any final words on this?
Yeah, no guillotine.
No guillotine.
Just say no to guillotines.
Well said, Shannon.
I do think that we're pretty far from the Twitter mobs to the guillotine. So I think we're still in kind of safe territory. But I do respect the fact that you seek a more nuanced conversation. And I think that the only way we're ultimately going to get through this is to have a nuanced conversation where a lot of the people who have been doing most of the talking for the past many years need to shut up and do some of the listening. And a lot of the people that haven't been listening to can finally do some of the talking. And I think that then we will finally start to move ahead. I think that, everything, there was a lot of talk about at the beginning with the protests and the rioting and everything that was going on, that everybody should act a certain way, and the politicians were saying one thing and the protesters were saying another. And I forget who said it, but there's a really good point that protesters are there to protest. Protesters are there to be extreme, to get the ideas out there, to push the boundaries. Yep. And then politicians are going to be politicians about it. They're going to get worried and they're going to say, oh, my constituents are this. And they're going to do the things that we need to do to actually get things moved into law and move those things. And I think similarly with this, I think we all agree that a mob is not a great thing. And when everybody does turn into a mob, whether it's a social media mob or a real life mob, things can get out of hand. Yeah. And I think that so that point that you make is very well taken. And I think it's true. But I think that sometimes a mob happens. And I think that, again, as we've been talking about this, I still can't think, as much as I'm racking my brain about this, of someone who was unjustly canceled, who had no opportunity to sort of turn things around at some point. There's probably something out there, and somebody, when we post this, will give me 10 examples and I'll be like, oh, I'm a fucking idiot. I didn't think of that. But I can't think of any right now. And so I think that thus far, the idea of cancel culture is being drummed up by the right, but it's not nearly as bad as it is if it even does exist. And I kind of agree with Johnny.
They're trying to cancel our actual culture. That's what scares me. That's what
right is. And I think we said this on the very first episode, probably right after the protest. We said, the entire concept, at least when it comes to history, not pop culture, they're trying to cancel culture by taking down these monuments. I'm like, bitch, you didn't teach us about the Native Americans. You told us Thanksgiving was like a fun little dinner.
Tulsa riots?
You didn't teach us about the Tulsa riots. Like our history of America has actually been canceled for so many years, and people are actually just saying we need to tell the full story.
Yep, I agree. Shannon, any final words?
No guillotine.
No guillotines. There it is.
No mobs except the flash ones.
There you go.
10 years ago.
There you go. Nice. All right, Steve, any final words on this as we wrap up this Cine-Files short that has gone on? Cine-Files medium, I would say.
I'll say two things. The first is this was a nuanced conversation. And this was a conversation between people that respect each other, that didn't have exactly the same opinions, but listened to each other. And I think that was great. And we need a lot of this. That's the first thing. And the second thing is just, I hope that when you start to go to retweet that thing or say, destroy that person, I hope that people will take a breath and go, you know what? I need to find out one more thing. I need to learn one more thing before I hit that send button on that tweet or whatever it is and jump on a bandwagon, just to know a little bit more. And then if you still want to do it, then do it.
Well, something encouraging to take from this as we wrap up is that Deshaun Jackson, who was a wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles, he tweeted out something where he was quoting Hitler. It was anti-Semitic stuff. But the mob came after him. But the Philadelphia Eagles, who's owned by a Jewish man, and their general manager is Jewish as well. They're actually finishing a documentary about Hitler. They opened the doors to understanding by having a conversation with Deshaun. Julian Edelman, who is a Jewish receiver for the New England Patriots, reached out to Deshaun Jackson and invited him to the Holocaust Memorial. They're going to do that. And a 95-year-old survivor of Auschwitz reached out on Zoom to Deshaun Jackson, and Deshaun Jackson has accepted the invitation to visit Auschwitz. He apologized for his posts and then opened his mind up to have this conversation.
That's the way to do it.
If there's any hope for you to take from this conversation, Steve, it is that situation can exist as well as the mob stuff. I know all of us, I think, would like to see more of that, because the person is saying, oh, I see your point of view. I'm willing to open my mind and hear the other side of it, which you don't always get. When the other side of it is the flash mob, sometime, or the mob will actually call you out until you listen. So these are the possibilities that exist in our world now.
Can I say just one really quick thing just based on that? Is that I've read a bunch of stories or listened to a bunch of interviews of former white supremacist neo-Nazis who got turned around. It's remarkable how often Jews are involved in that turnaround.
Of course.
That it was someone who said, and there was one guy in particular whose whole career is going to neo-Nazis and saying, I was one of you, and come. And what changed him was a rabbi that spent like 3 straight days with him, talking to him. And that what opened his and showed more compassion for him than anyone he had ever met.
You're the chosen people. I don't know what you want. You're the chosen people.
I have one final thought about that.
Okay. Does everyone get a
go?
All right, one more.
Are we the Cine-Buddies? Or
it sounds like Cinnabons.
Or the Geek-Files?
I like Geek-Files.
I think the Geek-Files is very mysterious.
I'm cool with Geek-Files.
I like it.
I like TGF. I like TGF. I'm down with that.
You just stick a little eye in there, and
thank God
it's Friday.
That's right. Well, hopefully nothing we said today caused any of you to cancel either of our shows in your minds. This was the first crossover episode, so there was bound to be a little bit of friction, and I think this is what it is: a good, nuanced conversation of strong opinions. From a bunch of people who are, I would say, intelligent and knowledgeable about these kinds of things. And so this is the kind of stuff that we love to do every once in a while. Certainly you guys got a window into our friendships. For those of you who maybe don't know us that well, you got a window into our friendship. We've had many discussions like this at numerous parties, and it's always been fun to have those discussions. So it's been an honor to host the Cine-Files short for this.
Fun for us. I don't know about the other people at the party, but fun for us.
That's fair, Shannon.
And the next time we do one of these, we'll introduce alcohol into the equation.
I think it's not a bad idea. Maybe a late night live.
You guys don't know what's in this.
That's fair. Or in this 40 ounces of liquor, ladies and gentlemen. All right, well, there we go.
That is not 40 ounces of liquor. You can't have 10 ounces of liquor.
If John Roca had 40 ounces of liquor.
Get out of here.
Everybody get John!
Cancel me as sons of bitches. You can tell everybody, go around the horn and tell everybody where they can find you at, Steve.
SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram, plus Cine-Files Podcast on Twitter is Cine_Files, and on Instagram is the Cine-Files Podcast.
On Twitter at Shannon_McClung, on Instagram at Shannon the Geek Buddy. And also, if you'd like to follow the Geek Buddies, on Instagram at the Geek Buddies. Oh boy, I flipped it, so I'm all kerfuffled right now. On Twitter at Geek_Buddies, on Instagram at the_Geek_Buddies.
There you go.
At MKToon on Twitter and Instagram. And hey, if you liked this and you had a good time and you're a Cine-Files follower, we encourage you to check out the Geek Buddies as well. It is also on the Outlaws page. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, anywhere where podcasts are available. We always love bringing more geeks to the conversation, and hopefully this is the first of many crossover episodes so that our Geek Buddies family, who is not already a fan of the Cine-Files, can come join those guys too.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a Cine-Files fan, if you're a Cine-Files fans, the Geek Buddy, exactly what Michael said. If you're a Geek Buddies fan, the Cine-Files is something where Steve and I dive into a great movie or a guilty pleasure movie, and we tear it apart and put it back together again as we discuss it, which is a lot of fun. And we've been going strong for almost 4 years now, over 4 years now, and it's a great, great show with a great fan base. The Geek Buddies, we're still new. We're still just past a year, but every week we sit down and discuss something or a bunch of geek news items and talk about a main topic, and that's what spurred this Cine-Files short. Was our main topic was cancel culture last week. Thank you all so much for watching this or for listening to us. Don't forget to subscribe down below to the Cine-Files YouTube channel, or subscribe to the Geek Buddies as well. All right, that's it. Follow me at The Roca Says. We'll talk to you next time for another Cine-Files short here from the Cine-Files and the Geek Buddies, the Geek-Files. Talk to you later. Bye.
Hey!